Hi, I'm Alistair, and in this video I'd like to teach you how to use the Unity game engine to create a fake document retrieval system. Now, what's one of those and why would you want to create one? So, imagine if you will you're in a real escape room game. You've broken into a corrupt organisation and you need to use a computer system to retrieve details of the shady goings-on that's been happening. Or maybe you've broken into a top secret biolab and you need to get the details of the chemical formula that they are creating. Or maybe you are in the police department and you need to pull up details of cold case murder files for an investigation, something like that. So in all of those cases, the player would encounter a computer in the room somewhere and they'd have a piece of information, a case ID or the surname of an employee or something like that. They would enter that information into the computer and the document retrieval system would come back and present them with some more information relevant to what they typed in. That in turn would give them the answer or a clue for another puzzle in the room, and so the story progresses. So there's actually a whole bunch of different escape room scenarios in which players might need to use a system like this. So to create one yourself, first go and download the Unity engine and then I'll describe you through the whole of the rest of the steps. It'll probably take about half an hour to create. Here goes. Okay, so recent versions of Unity come with this thing called Unity Hub, which is kind of like this launcher that comes when the program first starts. So we're going to go up to New here to create a new Unity project. And the first thing we're going to do is just select this and give it a name. So we'll call it Document Retrieval System. And then we're going to select the template. This is just going to be the initial configuration of the project. So it's going to be a 2D project that we're using a user interface for. And then we'll create the project. Okay, so when Unity loads, it'll look like this. We've got a couple of panels. We've got the hierarchy window here. That's the objects in your game. We've got the console tab at the bottom. This is the game window, so this is like the preview of what it's going to look like. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to click on the hierarchy, go to game object, UI, and we're going to insert a canvas. So that's like the basic 2D element, which is going to display our buttons and things. Now, with that selected, we're going to go here to the inspector and change constant pixel size to scale with screen size. I'm using a 720p resolution monitor, so I'm just going to put 1280 by 720 there. If you have a different aspect ratio, you can obviously type that there, but that's going to make sure that it will fit with whatever size monitor you deploy to and things like that. Now, with the canvas selected again, we're now going to go game object, and we'll insert our first element in the scene. So it's going to be an image. And there's our image in the middle of the scene. Now this is going to be like where the documents that are retrieved are going to be displayed. So we want it to kind of fill the screen. So I'm going to click on this button here, and then with Shift and Alt held down as well, I'm going to select this icon down at the bottom right. That's going to make the image fill the screen, or fill the canvas at least anyway. Okay, so now we're going to go back to UI again, and this time we're going to add a panel at the top. So a panel's like a container that can have different UI elements in it. And we want this to stretch across the top of the screen. So this time, again with Shift and Alt selected, we're going to select the icon that will just make it stretch across the width of the canvas, which is this one here. So click that. And then we'll click off the preset. So we'll set the height of our panel to 100 pixels. You can see the slight grey bar at the top there. That's our panel in the scene, and that's what's going to contain our button and our search input. So now one more time we'll add another UI element, and this time we're going to add the input field. Now you see there's two input fields. There's one that says TextMesh Pro after it and one that's a basic one. TextMesh Pro is the newer Unity object for input fields. It has more customization options for the text and things like that. So that's the one we're going to use. The first time you try to use it, you'll get a little window like this that says TextMesh Pro needs to import additional resources. So we're just going to click this button and let it do that. It won't take very long. So we'll just compile a few extra resources. These come with Unity anyway, so you don't actually need to download anything new for this to happen. You just need to add them into your project. And there we go, hopefully. Okay, so we can see at the bottom here we've got some messages in the console log. We can now close this window. If we click on the project tab, so this shows the files in the project, and you see we've got a scenes folder and we've got this new TextMesh Pro folder here. So this contains the additional resources that have been added to our project because we're using that UI element. Anyway, let's now click that to console and shrink that back up again, and we'll get back to where we were. So we've now got an input field in the hierarchy here. We're going to drag that into panel, so it's a child element of the panel, and we're also going to want to position that in the scene. So once again we'll come to the alignment tool here, and this is going to be aligned relative to the parent, so we want it centered relative to the panel. So we put pos y 0, and you see it's shot up to the top of the screen. There it is in the middle. Going to make it a bit wider, and also we'll make it slightly higher. So let's make it 60 pixels high. So this is going to be where our players are going to type the name of the document they want to retrieve. So that's probably long enough for me. You can alter that how you want depending on the size of the document. Okay, once more we'll go back to game object UI, and this time we'll insert a button. Notice again we've got two types of button. We'll go for the TextMesh Pro one, drag that into panel, and then we need to position the button. So again we'll come up to pos y, make it 0, and we'll move it across slightly, so 240 just to the right of the input bar. And we'll make it match the height as well, so we'll give this a height of 60. Width, that's probably okay actually. But we don't want it to say button particularly though, we want it to say something a bit more relevant. So we'll click button in the hierarchy and see it's got a text object. Come down here and we'll type search, let's say, instead of button. That sounds a bit more realistic. So that's edited the text on the button. Now it's always a good idea to test your game as you're going along. So actually I'm just going to make one change first. I'm going to come to here and just unclick this low resolution button and then reduce the scale to 1 time. So that's going to make this text a bit crisper here. So now we can click the play button, and even though we've not actually written any code yet, we can already come to the input field here, click on there and type some text. And we can highlight that and delete it again. We can click the search button, it will highlight. It doesn't do anything yet because we've not written that bit of the code, but we can see the interface start to take shape. Now uncheck the play button again. It's important to remember to come out of play mode, otherwise any changes you make won't get saved. Now let's fix the text in the user input field was a bit small there, so let's just fix that. So we'll find it in the hierarchy, click the text button, and then in the inspector where it says font size here, let's make that a bit bigger, something like 32. And that's the user input text. The placeholder text though, which is where it says user interface text, that also needs to be 32. That looks a bit better. And maybe we don't want it to say enter text, so let's highlight that and we'll say input ID value reference, let's say input ID reference. Perfect. But again, you can obviously make that say anything you want. So with that done, we're ready to start adding some code that actually makes the functionality happen. So to do that, what we're going to do, we're going to come down to the bottom here where it says project, click on that. Remember I said there's already 2 folders here. There was scenes already, TextMesh Pro added one more. We're going to add another one. So we'll right click in the project window, come to new folder, and we'll create a new folder called scripts. And then we'll go into the new scripts folder by double clicking. Right click in here and we'll do create C# script. Now we'll probably only have one script in this whole project, so we'll call it something kind of universal. So we'll just call it main. And then finally we'll double click that script, which will load Visual Studio, from which we can edit the code. Okay, so when Visual Studio loads up, you'll see that it already has a kind of template for you to fill in. So we've got a start function and an update function. And if you're familiar with using Arduino, these are very similar to the setup and loop functions that you have. So this one's called at the start, only once when the game first runs, and this one is called over and over. And we'll be inserting our own code into that section in a moment. At the top, you've also see some using directives. So these are very similar to on an Arduino when you want to incorporate functions from external libraries in your code. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to add some more using statements here. We're going to add system.io, which is for input and output of files. We're going to use that because we're going to be loading image files. The documents that are retrieved are going to be image files that are saved on the drive, so we'll load them using the system.io class. We'll also use Unity engine.networking. That's going to be the way that we load those files is actually via a web request. It seems a little bit odd, I know, talking about a web request when you're loading a local file, but that's just the protocol that Unity uses, so that's why that's there. We'll also use unityengine.ui because we're editing user interface elements, and finally we'll add TM Pro, which is the text mesh pro, which is the text elements on the screen, and we're going to be reading the value that's the user has typed in the input field, which is a text mesh pro element. So that's all our using elements. Now we'll go on to the class itself, put a few new lines here, and this is where we're going to declare our global variables. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a list of files. Now, the way that the program's going to work, we're going to scan a directory on the drive for all of the files it contains, all the image files it contains particularly. And we're going to, any file name in a particular folder, if the user types that file name in the search bar, it's going to bring up that document. So, I mean, exactly like an actual document search would work. We're going to then use that file to replace an image on the screen, so that's the image I've just put a reference to there. And the other thing we need a reference to is the input field itself to know what image is being requested. So that is an input field, and we'll call that input field. So we've got three public global variables at the top there, or three global variables rather. Two of them are public because we're going to be assigning values to those in the editor in a minute. Okay, then we'll go to the start function. So when the program first starts, what we're going to do is find all those files that are in the particular directory and add them into the all files array. So we'll create a new directory info, and the folder we're going to be using is a special folder that Unity defines called the streaming assets folder, and the location where that's saved on the drive is available through this application.streamingassets path. We'll actually just log what that file path is to the output as well, just in case you have any problems with it not being able to load files that you thought it was able to. It might just be useful to output that to the console log. So debug.log there, again, that's a lot like doing serial.println or something like that on an Arduino. Just lets you log the value of a variable, and that's going to spit out what the streaming asset path is. So having done that, what we're going to do is we're now going to add to our all files array all of the image files that we can find in that directory. So we'll call get files, and we'll load JPG files, and we'll also load PNG files as well. So we'll repeat that line there, but with star.png. So our all files array that we defined at the top here, this global array, has now got a list of all the JPEG and all the PNG files which the program can find in this streaming assets folder. And again, just for a little bit of debugging, because it's just useful to do, what we'll do is actually we'll loop over all the files in the all files array, and we shall just output to the console what those files are. So file found, and we'll put the file.name there. Okay, so that's it for the start functions. That's all that's going to happen when the program first runs. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create the sort of the handler function that's going to be called when the player clicks on the search button. So this is going to be a public function because we want to be able to call this from the button itself. We'll call it, what should we call it, load document, for example, something like that. Okay, so when the player clicks on the button, what we're going to do is we're going to look through all of the files that we were able to find when the program first started. So we'll iterate over the all files array like that, and we're going to compare the value that was entered into the input field, which is going to be input field.text. If that's equal to the file name of one of the image files that we were able to load at the beginning of the game. So one of the JPEG files or the PNG files matches the value that's been entered into the input field. What we'll do is we'll start another function here. We'll load the image associated with that file, and we'll pass it the file itself. And if we've been able to find a match, we can then return out of this function. If we haven't found a match after having looped through all the files in the all files array, then instead what we'll do is we'll set the image sprite to null. So the image, this is going to be the image that we'll actually load the files into. So if there's no match, that's basically just going to, it's the equivalent of clearing the screen. There we go. So now we need to create this load image function, which is called from the load document. So to do that, what we'll do is we'll just scroll down and create a new folder here, new function here. Now this is going to be an enumerator because this is what's called a coroutine. Now this is very important if you're writing a lot of Unity files, but not that important otherwise. What it basically means is that if we were to just write a normal function that loaded the image specified here, it would kind of hang the game while that function was being accessed, or while the file was being read from the drive and converted into a sprite and displayed on the screen. Everything else would hang. So you don't really want to do that. So a coroutine, it's a little bit like a thread, a separate thread that runs in the background, and it allows the main program to continue running. So if you're going to do anything kind of processor intensive in Unity, you generally want to do them in coroutines or on separate threads. So that's what this slightly curious sort of type definition here is the enumerator, because we're going to allow this to run kind of asynchronously, basically, from the load document function. So don't worry too much about that unless you kind of really want to know more about Unity. So we're going to call the load image function. So this gets called when the input field text matches one of the known image types. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to load that image. So we'll create a byte array that's going to contain the image data itself. And we'll create a texture. So new texture 2D. We'll initially create that with a width and a height of 2, but that will actually get overridden when we load the image file itself. So this is just kind of like a placeholder texture that we're going to load into. Now we're going to create a Unity web request, Like I say, this is a slightly curious way of doing it, because you kind of think that a web request is going to load a file from the internet. That's not actually the case. What we're going to load is a file from the local hard drive, and we're going to supply the full name of the file, like that. So we can load it from our streaming assets folder, and we're then going to yield return send request. So what this means is we're going to create the request, we're going to call it, and then this yield return kind of means wait until the request has been fulfilled. That's kind of what that statement means there. When it has finished loading, what we can now do is we can populate the IMG data byte array at the top here with whatever the web request returned. So we get that from download handler.data. Okay, so now we've got a byte array here. We need to turn that into a texture. So we're going to do text load image data, because image data is just a raw byte array. It's not actually an image yet. So first things first, we're going to turn it into a texture. And then what we need to do is to actually create a sprite, because a sprite is the 2D UI element that's going to be displayed on the screen. So we'll create a sprite from the texture that was loaded from the byte array. It's a little bit complicated what's going on there. Now this is going to be created at the top left corner. It's going to be as wide as the texture was and as high as the texture was as well. We want the pivot point to be in the middle, so that's going to be 0.5f, and finally we'll specify the number of pixels per unit. We'll go for 100, which is kind of the default value for that. So we had raw bytes that we populated from a web request. We created a texture from those bytes, and now we're creating a sprite from that texture. At least we will do if I put the syntax in correctly. There we go. And finally, we're going to assign the sprite value of the image. Now remember, image was this variable we held at the top here, to that sprite. Now we've still got the update template at the bottom. We're going to delete that because nothing is going to happen over and over in this script. The only thing that's actually going to get called is when the button is pressed. So we're going to get rid of update and just tidy up a few empty lines at the bottom there, and that is going to be all of our code. So we're going to do file, save, and now we can return to Unity. So now we've got the script that we created in Visual Studio, and we've also got the UI that we created in Unity, and we need to connect them together. So to do that, click on the project pane at the bottom here and go into the scripts folder. And so this is the main script that we've just created. And what we're going to do is we're going to attach that onto one of the active scene objects. So I'm just going to click and drag that script onto, I'm going to put it on canvas. You can kind of put it on any object, but canvas is the root of our scene. So I'm just going to click and drag it onto that. Then once you've done that, just click back to console and I can shrink that up again. Now when we highlight canvas in the hierarchy and we scroll down the inspector pane, you can see that we've got a new entry at the bottom for our main script that we've just attached. And it's got these two unassigned at the moment global variables. These were the public variables we declared at the top of the script. So image, well, this is going to be the image that is updated on the screen with the document that we retrieve from the image file from the document. So here's the image element in the UI, and we're going to drag that into this slot here. And then the script also needs to know what the input field is, because this is what it's going to compare the value that the user enters here to see if it matches any of the file names of the documents to retrieve. So we'll take the input field from the UI and we'll drag that into this field on the script here. So that's the script all configured with the references to the different objects in the scene. The next thing we need to do is to connect the button to call the correct function when it's clicked. So this time we'll click on the button here, and if we scroll down here we'll see that there's a list here that says on click. So these are all the events that are going to get triggered when the button is clicked. So we'll click the little plus icon, and in this slot here now we're going to do sort of the opposite way around. We're going to tell the button that it wants to call a function on the main script which we attach to canvas. So we'll drag canvas into this slot here, and then where it says no function we're going to tell it what function we want to call. Well, we want to call a function from the main script, and we want to call the load document function from the main script. So we're going to call main.load document, and that is assigned to the button. So now the canvas knows about the image and the input element, and the button knows about the script on canvas to call. So that's all the references set up. Now remember that the images themselves, I said, were going to be loaded from a special directory called streamingassets. So now let's create that and put some actual documents to load. So we'll go back to the assets, the kind of the root of our project assets. Right click and create a new folder, and we'll call this streaming assets. And it's important to get the name right here, so with the spaces and the capitalization that does need to be correct, because this is a special folder which Unity is going to look for. And then we'll just go into that folder. Now here is where you want to copy any of the image files which you want the user to be able to access in the game. So I've just created 2 JPEG files here. I just made these in paint.net. So if I just load one of them up to show you, this is my sort of dummy criminal reference image. But this could really be anything you want depending on the theme of your game. So you might be pulling up medical records or criminal databases, or if you've got a sci-fi game it could be the results of some sector scan or chemical analysis, or anything you want really. The idea being that players will enter some ID number, and then this will present them with the information that they then need to proceed through another puzzle or something like that. So I've just got 2 different example images here, but you can really have as many as you want. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, just using Windows Explorer, drag those into the streaming assets folder. And it's important to note here that the file name, remember, this is going to be what the players will have to type to bring up that image. So here I've got some kind of ID number. You can have 2 images with different file names if you want 2 different things. So if you want the player to be able to enter maybe a choice of a surname or a first name or a date of birth, whatever, that's fine. You just duplicate the file and give it all the names that you want to bring up that same image. And with that done, that's actually ready to test again. So let me shrink this image up, and we're all ready to play, and we'll try playing the game again. So we can see as the game is playing in the console window down the bottom here, we've had our little debug messages come up, which is useful because it's reminded me what the name of the files which I created were. Now if I try entering into the input ID field here one of those file names, let's go 100432, click search, up comes the image associated with that file. So it's found a matching file based on the name in the streaming assets directory, and it's just displayed the image using a full screen like that. If I now do one that doesn't exist, so I'll just make up some other number, search, well that's where it assigns the sprite field back to null again. So there's no image to be found here, and we just get a blank screen instead. Now let's try loading the other image up. Click search, and here we've brought up our other image, our other document to retrieve. So you can create as many different documents as you want, you can have them named whatever you want, and if players type the matching name for the file name, not including the file extension I should point out, because we're just matching the file name itself, not the extension, then it will be brought up and displayed in the window here. Now there's still lots more you can do with this. You could add a nice background image, you could add some more logos and text to make this look a little bit more authentic. But I really just wanted to demonstrate the functionality, and this is a working system now. So let's try exporting this in a format that you'd actually be able to use in a PC in an escape room, say. So we'll go File, and we'll go to Build Settings. So this is where we're actually going to build an executable based on the project we've got at the moment. So we want to include the scene we've got at the moment. You want to pick the target platform. I'm developing on a PC, so this is going to be a Windows app, but you can make this work on many other devices as well. So I'm going to simply click Build and use all the default settings for now. When I do that, that's going to give me an option of where I want the build to be created. So I'll simply create a new folder here for now, and I'll call it, I don't know, win build, let's say, and put it in there. And then I simply wait for Unity to compile my project together while I go and get a cup of tea. And here's the directory in which it's created the build. So we've got an exe file with the name of the project. So mine was document retrieval system.exe. We've got some other files which you can leave alone. But if you look inside this data folder here, and then notice we've still got our streaming assets with our 2 image files there. So even after you've finished the Unity compilation, you've deployed this, you can change the images that can be retrieved very simply by changing the files in this directory. So you can add new ones in, or you can rename the ones that are there. And you don't need to load Unity again and recompile the program just to change the documents that are available. So if I now just try running it, so we'll load the main exe. So you'll see it loads full screen, fills the monitor, and looks exactly the same as it did when it was playing in the editor. So again, if I just type a makes up reference here, nothing's going to happen. But if I type one of the file names of the files that were saved in that streaming assets folder, we get the image brought up on the screen that's associated with that file. If I can remember what the other file name was, there we go. And that's really all there is to a system like this. All it takes now is for you to add the files that you want players to be able to retrieve and to style them in a way that fits with the theme of your game. And of course you can add extra icons to the screen and anything that really helps the player just lose themselves in the immersion and suspends their disbelief that what they're really doing is accessing a top secret database of criminal investigations or a secret formula of a chemical lab. It doesn't really matter. Now, I hope that you found that useful. I hope you were able to follow along and be able to create one of these systems yourself. As always, I will upload all the code and everything that goes with this project over on my Patreon account. I have a lot of other projects there as well related to different kind of escape room tech, so do go and check that out. And if you are able to support me, and if you'd like to support me to create more tutorials like this in the future, that would be amazing. But if you can't, I will just keep on putting them on YouTube anyway, and I hope you look forward to seeing some more in the future. So thanks very much for watching.